Leading us off today, though, is going to be Heidi Carrion. She is senior scientist over at the consumer foods team at JM Smucker. Heidi is got a pretty, in addition to a solid resume, she's got the illustrious distinction of being a two-time now presenter at Accelerant Research Virtual Insights Conference. So she joined some pretty elite company there. But in a different role, different industry, different company, and different perspectives to share. So very much looking forward to Heidi's presentation. It's going to be on Mind the Gap, Elevating Your Research. And I think that's going to be it for me. I'm going to get out of the way, Heidi, let you do your thing. I will circle back toward the end of the presentation, lead any Q&A, and let you have at it, Heidi.
Thank you, Bill. I want to add one more ground rule. We're also at the mercy of our pets. I have a golden doodle puppy here, so hopefully he'll be on his best behavior. Let's see. Does that look right? Okay. All right, well, thank you, Bill, for the invitation. I did present with Accelerant Research a year and a half ago, I think it was, with a previous position, previous role, different industry altogether. So this is not a repeat. This is actually a new presentation based on my experience just being in the industry and also a researcher for several years now. So before I start, I want to talk a little bit about my background. Like a lot of consumer researchers, I have a background in life sciences. My bachelor's degree was in biology. I spent a lot of time studying plants and actually snails. And I spent a summer at NASA focusing on growing wheat in space. But then I had to get a real job. So my first job out of college was as an R&D chemist with the Candle Science Group at Bath & Body Works, which is near Columbus, Ohio. And that was a great first job. It was a nice blend of kind of technical skills and a little bit of dark magic. It was candles. Traveled to Guatemala quite a bit, was where our primary vendor was. Great job, but one thing that I saw in this first job was a focus group. And from that point on, that's what I figured out I wanted to do. And I was trying to figure out for a couple of years, how do I get from where I am in R&D to consumer research? So eventually I pursued my MBA. And my first job after my MBA was with a company called Nottingham Spurk. Nottingham Spurk is a product design firm, industrial design firm located in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. It's large for a design firm. It's about 65 people, but still a pretty small company. But one thing we did have was an in-house focus group facility. So from day one, I was lucky enough to be a moderator. And that job I'll talk about in a moment was just a lot of learning everything from the ground up. We did a little bit of moderator training eventually, but so much of the job was just figuring out how to approach, what's your rational approach to accomplish this business objective. We are a small, scrappy company. So a lot of what I did there was very much learned on the job. I eventually left Nottingham Spurk and started with Sure Tape Technologies, which is an adhesives company, better known as the duct tape company. And I was in an innovation role there, and I was actually in R&D as well. And pretty early on, I started suggesting and finally got some funds to do some work where we're actually answering R&D questions using consumer research skills. So that evolved eventually to more of an insights role. And then about a year and a half ago, I left Sure Tape and started with the JM Smucker company as a senior scientist in products research. Now, I'd never heard of products research before, maybe 2 years ago. But what it is, it's a consumer research function that's embedded in R&D. So everything we do is very much focused on product. And we actually have 3 divisions, foods, pet, and coffee. But I'm in the food division. It's the one that Smucker's probably best known for, at least by the name. So I focus a lot on peanut butter and jelly. And actually my first year, I focused on Jif peanut butter primarily. And now I'm focusing a little bit more on Uncrustables. So as far as my consumer research background, like I mentioned, very scrappy roots. I consider myself to be self-taught in a lot of ways. When I was with the consumer research, or with the product design company, a lot of the focus groups that we were doing was more to create stimuli for our designers, for them to see problems firsthand, to understand the user experience and understand opportunities where we could address some of those problems and needs people are having. So in a lot of ways, the focus groups weren't really for research purposes as much as stimuli for them to go figure out opportunities to solve. I am a qualitative researcher at heart. My favorite thing to do is to be one-on-one with consumers. And I've done a lot of one-on-one ethnographic, in-home, in-business research, whether it's around the dining room table or on the couch or on a farm, which is where a lot of my duct tape experience led me to. But I do really enjoy being one-on-one with the consumer. And I love taking really messy info, which is the kind of the core thing that happens in qualitative research and trying to make sense of it. My quant experience is a pretty similar story. Self-taught in a lot of ways using DIY platforms, also had access to some stats software. So, but really learned my quant skills from the ground up. And I really love taking quant and qual and blending them to tell a more rich, cohesive story. So as I mentioned, a lot of my background is with DIY platforms, especially quant, but also I've done a bit of moderating with Qualboard and Recollective as well. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of sun coming in here. It'll go, wait a minute, we're in Cleveland. So anyways, I've learned though, since I've been in the corporate world, that using DIY platforms can be a little controversial. You're not spending a whole lot of money, but you are spending a lot of your time. It's almost an invisible cost that the company doesn't really see. But then the harder part of it is, how do you tell your message in a convincing way? And that's one thing that I used to struggle with a lot. I've gotten better, but that's what I want to talk about today, actually, is the gap. Mind the gap between doing research and presenting research. And this doesn't have to be consumer research specific. I think a lot of these messages actually can extend to R&D or extend to any time you have a message. And how do you convey that message convincingly? I'm not actually doing a lot of my own research now with the Smucker company. I actually work a lot with outside vendors and suppliers, but we do have an in-house sensory panel, which is a great resource to have. And they are giving me a lot of Excel sheets. So I do a little bit of messing with the data, but a lot of what I'm doing, just for transparency, is much more working with research partners at this point. But this used to be me. In the past, I would spend hours upon hours, writing my surveys and writing my discussion guides and making sure that my skip logic was right and everything made sense, and cobbling together images if I needed to show concepts, and writing statements. And then I'd move into the analysis, and I'd spend so much time trying to put together a story and look at how different segments compared and how everyone's answering certain questions different ways. And then I get to the point where I'd be presenting my research. And sometimes it went really well. Other times it didn't go so well. And I felt like my message really wasn't getting through. And it was super frustrating. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, why, what is it that I was doing, maybe not wrong, but what could I be doing better? And so that's what I want to share with you today. Some things that I have found that has helped me gain credibility in my field and allow me to present better, I think, than I used to, at least. And I think these are some messages that can help you as well. So first of all, these are the three things I'm going to talk about. Aesthetics. They matter a lot. I'm going to talk about learning to make simple, impactful visuals to share your data and insights. Number two, understanding. It matters a lot as well. I'm learning to convey clarity with your slides by using storytelling techniques. And number three, feedback. You need to embrace the importance of feedback to develop more audience-centric presentations. So first of all, and it's intentional, that's first, aesthetics. Aesthetics matter a lot. This is a really big one. And while this by no means is what separated me from our full service partners, I think it actually is a big part of when it comes to the presentation. When your slides don't look like they're very professional, you're losing credibility right there. So of course, our full service vendors have a lot more tools to work with, a lot more people. They have graphic design resources a lot of times. So it's not even a fair fight, but I've learned that aesthetics matter more than I used to think. I used to think that my boss didn't really want to pay me to spend time, just doing imagery on my slides. They just wanted the content. But I've learned that I was wrong about that. I used to present slides that look like this in my presentations. Just to be clear, I'm not talking, this is not J.M. Smucker data I'm talking about. We're not talking about peanut butter and jelly. This actually is about some odor disposal products that I worked on in the past. So I love messing with data and looking at how my different segments answered certain questions. And I love setting things on an index and seeing, where the data popped and where 20% liked it more, 20% liked it less. But I've learned that this is not a good way to present data. Isn't this better? I think if you would have stared at the previous slide long enough, you probably would have gotten to this point. But I found that this is a much more impactful way to show my major points. The message is kind of the same, but it's much more concise. And I've pulled out what really matters and what I really want to convey. So I'm showing a big number, 91%. I'm showing that very boldly. 91% of consumers are interested in, or have these odor control issues. And there's certain segments, parents, millennials, homeowners, and renters, that over-index, that actually would have more interest in products that meet this need. So I found that it's much more, I can get the point across much more clearly by pulling out and using large graphics and using pictures to convey what the major messages are. I'm going to go through 4 different ways of showing data that are kind of my go-tos and I found to be helpful. So first of all, relationships. I want to talk about how I've shown relationships in different ways. And I would encourage you to move out of Excel if you can. Excel is an awesome tool to use, but when it comes to showing data, you're kind of limited. So on the left-hand side here, I have a bubble chart where I'm showing some mutual information, but I'm showing it all in one graphic. And that's what I like about it. So I'm talking about people that buy both regular and specialty products. And I'm trying to convey the point that it's not just one user group that's buying specialty products. There's actually a lot of crossover. As you can see, of all the regular products, almost 10%, so 9.1% of people are buying both regular and specialty, and a very small sliver of the pie is actually buying only specialty products. So this can be part of a very compelling story about how things need to appeal to different user groups. You can go a lot of places with this, but what I like is I'm showing it all in one visual. I could have shown this in a series of pie charts, but I really like how I can show with one bold graphic here. On the right-hand side, I'm not saying you can't make an index. You can show indices, but you just need to pull out what's really important. And what I like about this table here is that it's color coded. You have regular buyers in blue, specialty buyers in black, and then total buyers in green. And you have arrows that are color coded and show where the data is more significant or where it over indexes. I'm not really showing under indexing here, but I would show it upside down if something with under indexing. So you can show an index, you just need to simplify it and show only what's important. Next, found visuals. I like to find visuals and map out whatever my data is telling me. So for this, I'm showing that a lot of people, this was closer to 2020 where you had homebound consumers. I'm sure we all remember those days. But I'm talking about how homebound consumers were noticing more household odors, and they're noticing them in a lot of places in their homes. And I could have shown this in a bulleted list, but I found it was much more impactful to map it out and show all the different places in a home where people are experiencing this problem. And I found that this was a much more impactful way to show and a much more impactful way to set up the solution than just showing a bulleted list of all the different places people are experiencing odor. Next, metaphors. I really like metaphors, although I'm not sure I'm very good at them. I love when people talk to me in metaphors, and I like to use metaphors if I can to show processes or show data somehow. So I'm talking about a consumer journey map here, and I'm using a slide to convey how the journey happens. So for organization, knowing where to start is difficult. You're starting up that slide, and it can be difficult. It's an uphill battle. Then you get a plan, and you're starting to build momentum. You're heading up the slide, you're making some progress, but you're still having challenges. Finding time is challenging. And then you're almost there. The uphill climb is almost over. And then you've reached the peak. You're at your maximum point of organization. And that feels great because you're at the top. And then you you kind of fall into the norm, and it's easy to keep organized at first, but eventually the slide happens And then at a certain point, you're back to where you started. You probably feel really disappointed with your ability to keep organized. So by using a slide, I feel like I can convey kind of the emotion involved in this person's struggle with organization a little bit better. It conjures up a little bit of nostalgia, and it feels like you could actually relate to this journey a little bit more because I'm using a metaphor. And then the final technique that I want to talk about is trying to make sense out of all of your open-end responses. You know, whenever you're writing a survey, you never want to skip the why questions. You always want to ask why and give consumers an opportunity to give you open-end responses. But then what do you do? What do you do with all of those hundreds or thousands of responses? I have found that making word clouds is sort of effective, but I find it really hard to present and know what words to pull out and how do you present to a word cloud. So what I've tried to do is assess weighting to my word cloud. So specifically the question here was, which package or graphic treatment resonates with consumers more? Is it one that's more modern looking, which is I'm showing on the left-hand side here? Or is it something that cues environmentally friendliness a little bit better, which I'm showing on the right side here? And what I found is 40% of people that answered this question liked the modern, fresh and modern look a little better. And then 60% liked the environmentally friendly look better. So I put out a couple quotes to kind of give color to what specifically they were saying. And then I made word clouds to show some of the keywords they were using. But I think the most impactful part is the visual in the middle, the pie chart, the donut chart that shows how many and what proportion said either thing. So I don't know that this is the perfect solution to open ends. I'm actually interested in hearing how other people have handled open-ended responses. This is one way that I found that it makes it a little bit more manageable to talk about what people were saying in open ends. So you need to learn to make simple, impactful visuals. One thing that I've found really helpful is to use the appendix heavily in your presentations. One thing that I'll do is have only a couple of slides, maybe 5 to 7 slides is my presentation, but then all my data charts and even like those that appendix or that index chart that I showed before will land in my appendix. So I have all the details there if somebody asks a specific question, but I'm really not planning to present it at least every time. Another thing that happens when you're in a corporate research role is that a lot of times you're not actually doing the research, like kind of my current situation, but I'm communicating a lot of research that other people are doing, whether it's internal partners or it's suppliers. I'm communicating that at different levels within my organization. So it's helpful to, from the beginning, start with 2 different versions of the presentation. I like to think of this as scuba diving and snorkeling. So for your technical team, like I'm in R&D, so I'm presenting to the technical team a lot, and they love the details, but I go scuba diving with them, and they really want to be in the weeds and see how I even got to this point and this conclusion. They want to see all the backup and substantiation. So I keep the scuba diving version for them, but then when I'm presenting out to the leadership team, I have these snorkel statements. So I consider a higher level presentation that has only really the essential takeaways from what the research intended to find and what we're going to do with it specifically. And those snorkel statements seem to resonate really well with the leadership team. So from the beginning, just plan to do 2 different presentations. And finally, I have some resources that I've used to share. So I mentioned already stepping outside of Excel, and these are some resources that I have found over the years that have been really, really helpful, almost crucial anymore to designing presentations. First of all, Canva. It's probably obvious at this point. I meant to say it in the beginning, but this is not a graphic design presentation. This is just a researcher trying to dabble in making things look better. And I feel because of that, I feel like Canva was created for me. For years, I was looking for something that I could make visuals, even though I have no graphic design skills at all. I don't know how to use Illustrator. And then I came across Canva. And this is a great tool because it's very approachable. It's very simplistic. It was actually created for people, I mean, teachers mainly, that were making yearbooks in Australia. And they needed a user-friendly way to lay out pictures and fonts. So that's the origin story of Canva, and it's grown to be a pretty helpful tool for any kind of graphic design. Next, Diagrammer by Duarte. I can't even believe this resource is free. It's actually really great. Check it out. It is really great at organizing information in flowcharts and showing flowcharts in different ways. You may or may not download their visuals, but it's helpful to look just to get ideas of how you should be laying out a process or how just different things relate to each other. Next, remove.bg. This is a website that I go to and use probably once a day. This is a really, really easy way to remove a background from a picture, which I do a surprisingly number of times every week, almost on a daily basis. So check it out. Next, Flat Icon is a great resource for iconography. I know I'm always trying to find like a very simple line drawing to show whether it's the people or a house or dollar sign or anything. And Flat Icon's been a really good resource for that. Shutterstock is good to find any photo really that anyone has ever taken professionally. You can buy it at Shutterstock. There's also some free resources there, but that's a great place to find high-res photos for a presentation. And the final two here, PixArt and PieZap, my kids actually use these to make memes, but I found they're really easy ways to edit photos, so I use them as well. All right, so we've already established that aesthetics are important. Now let's move on to understanding. So communication is a two-way street. If the info isn't being received well, then your message is not effective, no matter how beautiful your slides are. So the first thing you need to consider is your delivery style. There's so many options available, but you have to know from the front end, is this going to be an in-person presentation? Or is it going to be a virtual presentation? Or worse these days, hybrid. And you need to plan for that from the beginning. As far as delivery style, I'm not going to tell you what the best delivery style is to use because you know your corporate environment much better than I do. But you have a lot of different options when it comes to how you're going to deliver your message. Can you have an interactive message where you're facilitating and you're presenting some information, but then you're getting to the results, to the end part with your audience? Does it need to be more casual, where it's planned? You definitely have content planned, but you're delivering it pretty casually and informally. Or does it need to be more formal, kind of like this, where I have a sequence of slides that I plan to go through every single slide in order, and I have a script that I'm sort of following loosely, but it's a more formal presentation. Or does it have to be canned, where the slides live without you? I find this to be the most challenging, actually, where you're not there to give context. So everything that you want your audience to take away from your slides has to be on the slide. So think about these on the front end. And it'll make your job much easier when it comes to meeting the expectations with your presentation. The next thing I want to talk about is a storytelling technique, called loglines. And what a logline is, it's a one-sentence summary that's used in the movies. The producer usually writes it, and it's a one-sentence synopsis of what the entire movie is about. And it's pretty important. It has to capture the entire essence of the movie, the setting, the major characters, the conflict. And it's an important thing too, because they actually use the log line to promote the movie, and it needs to be compelling. So we're going to look at a couple of these. Two unlikely star-crossed lovers fall in love aboard the world's largest ship and struggle to keep the relationship afloat as the doomed ship sinks into the Atlantic. Any guesses? No, not Ocean's 11. This is Titanic, of course. So one more here. A former fighter pilot attempts to train a crew of top-notch young pilots to perform a daring mission, but knows that he's the only one with the best chance of surviving this dangerous feat. Any guesses? The new Top Gun movie, Maverick. So I think you can appreciate what a log line is. You have to learn to be very efficient with your words and tell just enough to pique interest, but not too much. You want to overwhelm people with information. So I would encourage you to think about the principle of log lines when constructing every slide. You don't have to write your log line on the slide. It doesn't have to be the topic of your slide, but you should have a reason, a concise reason for why you're including every slide in your deck. So if you look at this slide, what is the log line here? Trick question, there's actually not one. I'm showing you way too much information. It's hard to really deduce where you're going or what the key learning is on the slide. But if you look at this slide, you can stare at this for between 7 and 10 seconds and you know the gist of it. You can see that a lot of consumers have a need. They're struggling with odor issues, and there are certain consumer segments that a solution will resonate with more than others. So I encourage you to think about the logline principle and make sure you have a compelling reason to put every slide in your deck. Another technique that I found helpful is to record yourself. This might be one of the most intimidating symbols you'll ever see. I mean, who really likes to be recorded? Probably not many of us. But in the old days, when I was a moderator, I would often have maybe 2 or 3 different topics that I was moderating focus groups for in a week. And I would have so much information, and I had a really hard time just even knowing where to start the report. And I also had way too many hours in the car. So I started carrying a little handheld recorder with me. I mean, now I could have easily used an app on my phone, but at the time I had a handheld recorder that I kept in my car. And what I would do is I would hit record. And suddenly I would feel like I was in presentation mode. I could quickly get to those 3 to 5 key learnings that I wanted to tell the client. And that would allow me to know where to even start writing my report at the end. So it's actually a really funny thing that happens, and I can't promise it'll work for everyone, but for me, this is kind of a little mind game that I would play with myself, and it really helped me know where to start by getting to the end. So I encourage you to try it. And also, I never actually went back and listened to any of these recordings, but it was more just to help the thoughts crystallize in my mind and, like I said, know where to start. So as far as understanding, think about what type of delivery do you need? Think about the logline principle for every single slide in your presentation. And if you can't tell me what the logline is, then you don't need that slide in your presentation. And finally, think about where you want to be at the end to even know where to begin. And I do this by recording, which has been super helpful. Now let's move on to the last chapter here, the importance of feedback. First of all, think about how you are growing your business. And I don't mean top line sales. I work for an $8 billion company, so it's pretty hard for me to look at the work I'm doing now and see that reflected in the top line. Maybe 3 to 5 years from now, I could see some of the work I'm doing show up in some level, but I'm not talking about top line. I'm talking about you yourself and how you're growing your business, your own personal business. A lot of times in consumer research roles, we are more like internal consultants, where we're trying to inject ourselves into different processes. And you can look at the different research that you're doing and see how much impact you're having. One indicator that I have found that kind of shows me how I'm growing my business is how many people are coming to me to ask for help. If nobody is, then nobody must be seeing much value in the research and the work that I'm doing. But over time, I found that more and more people come to me with challenges, and they're not dictating to me how to do the research anymore than maybe they used to, but they're coming to me with the problem, and I can help them craft what the objective is and recommend what is the best approach and then execute as well. Another way to look at the softer side of how you're growing your business is, how is your research being used? Are you seeing your research show up in other people's slides, and what kind of decisions are being made with the research you're doing? There was a time when I was answering like very, very tactical questions like, should we include a screw in this package? And if we do, what does that mean? Very, very tactical, important at the time, of course, for what the claims you're trying to make, but super tactical. But eventually my research became more useful in more strategic decisions like, should we enter a new market? And what do we currently have? And what would resonate with consumers if we were going to go this direction versus this direction? So I found that the research I was doing went from being very tactical, at least a larger portion being very tactical, to more of it being more strategic. So I grew up in the country, actually not too far from where I live now, in Eastern Ohio. And I remember growing up hearing farmers talk about how you can tell the weather by how the cows act. And I never really cared at the time, and I never really knew what they were talking about. But recently I've heard why and what they were talking about. When a storm's coming, cows try to run from the storm. They try to get as far as they can away from the storm, as far as they can go in the pasture. In contrast, buffalo actually run to the storm. They face a storm head on. So what happens is cows end up getting very, very, very wet and stay wet for a long time. Whereas buffalo, since they face the storm head on, they don't really get very wet at all. So I like to think about receiving feedback in these terms. And am I more of a cow and shy away from feedback, or am I more like a buffalo and face it head on? I can't say I'm one or the other. I'm probably a little bit in between, but I would encourage you to think of this and be more like a buffalo. Feedback isn't always pleasant, but it's a good way. It's the best way we have to learn about what message is getting through and what messages aren't getting through so well. So I encourage you to seek out feedback any chance you get. And that can be approaching somebody after the meeting, someone that you trust, and ask them if your key points got through, or ask them, how do you think I showed up in the room today? Ask for feedback. You can do it more formal and send out, if it's a large meeting, send a survey afterwards. I've done that once or twice maybe. I advocate for actually more of a human approach where talking to someone that you trust. But I encourage you to seek out feedback any chance you can. So I don't love this picture. It's a little uncomfortable, but what it is me standing up in front of a crowd and delivering my message. And as researchers, we kind of have a unique opportunity where when we have research, we have a chance to present it. And I encourage you to take that chance anytime you get it. I know it's painless to email a deck and ask for questions. I do it too once in a while, but I've learned that you have much more control over the message, and you can make sure people are receiving the message the way you intended it to when you're presenting it live. So I would recommend that you never surrender your platform. If you can present it live and you can be the one to speak to your message and your research, take it and do it. And none of this is really easy that I'm talking about today, but I promise you the only way getting better at presenting happens is through practice. So I encourage you to try new techniques and take the opportunity to present whenever you can. So finally, as far as feedback, just to recap, think about how you're growing your business and think about the impact your research is having. Seek feedback out, ask people what's coming through, what's getting lost, how did that, how did my message, how do you think it was received in the room today? And finally, never surrender your platform. So I hope that these 3 core messages have come through: the importance of aesthetics, understanding, and feedback. You need to learn to make simple, impactful visuals, which I think is the best way to share your insights and data. You need to learn to convey clarity with your slides by using storytelling techniques, like I was talking about with log lines and even with recording yourself. And then finally, you need to embrace the importance of feedback so you can develop more audience-centric presentations. So thank you. This has been fun. Really appreciate you joining me here today. And I'm happy to answer any questions or even hear some testimonials of other ways people have gained experience and increased their credibility through how they're presenting, or other ways in general, how you've gained credibility in your organization. So thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Heidi. It looks like we have a few questions that have already come through while you were speaking. Anybody else has questions, feel free to throw those into the Q&A or the chat. We'll keep an eye on those. But let's start with Stephanie. She asks, how do you balance being broad and high level with key takeaways and also giving teams enough information that they may identify nuggets that kick off an inspiration that you didn't even know might inspire new ideas or solutions?
That for sure is a challenge. It's hard when you're trying to be the one to deliver the message and you don't necessarily know what's important to every single person that's going to ever, receive this research. So I guess I would just encourage you to, keep all the information in the appendix so that when questions come up, you can refer back to it. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure all of us have times when we've prepared a report and there's so much more to put into it, but we're time constrained. And so we put only in it what we think we really need to get through the day or get through that one decision point, but you have so much more information. So I recommend trying to think through what will be crucial and document it somewhere, even if it's not in your presentation, and just keep it at some level so you can refer back to it in the future. So that's probably not a great answer, but I acknowledge that being a really difficult challenge. And I'd also point back to the idea of just making two different presentations, one that is super high level and addresses that decision you're trying to make, and then also one that is more in the weeds, and it can invite more questions and invite more conversation. You can always dig later and find more or do more analysis on the back end, as long as people know what you even have.
This is the whole scuba diving versus snorkeling idea, right?
It is, yes.
Or kiddie pool as well, if we're inviting the ad agency. Oh,
right. I didn't say that.
I'm just kidding. All right, let's see. Geraldine asks, what tools are you using to analyze and present open ends? Any tools that leverage AI or machine learning that you would recommend?
I'm not using anything yet, but I am very, very interested. I'm hoping to actually kick off our first AI research project in the next few weeks here. I find it to be so fascinating. And I was talking to somebody this week about how they were exploring something new, a new category they didn't even know, or new product, they didn't even know what questions people would ask. So they left it super open-ended and used machine learning or natural language processing, probably the same thing, to get to the themes that they could then craft the discussion guide with after they've done that initial open-ended exploration. So I'm not using anything, but I'm very interested in this category. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody has any recommendations on something. I've also had some people come to me and say they can take open ends from research we've already done and analyze that. So I'm interested in doing it, haven't kicked off anything yet.
And let's see, Lisa asks, curious if you or Smuckers have a system to help research live on in the organization so that others can use and repeat efforts, a repository of research for others to refine and mine.
Because of the question, I'm sure you probably have the same challenge where it's a big company and people come in and out of roles pretty frequently. And it's really a challenge. And we have SharePoint, but unless you know how that previous person really thought and kept their files organized, it's hard. It's kind of hard to follow the paper trail there, the digital paper trail even. One thing I have seen though, our insights partners do this within Smucker. They create what they call a knowledge estate. It's basically a PowerPoint slide, and they have like peanut butter, and they have like all the different studies listed out. It's just simple. It's like A and U, and here's the link. And then like segmentation, here's the link. And they'll have the year. So it's probably just the year, the type of the study and the link. And so in one PowerPoint slide, you have like years and years and years of research, you have access to it at least. So it's nice because you can look at it and see what exactly exists and when was the last A and U, because they're always way too long ago, for example. But that's a nice way I found. It's kind of it feels like kind of a low-tech solution where you're just using a slide to put in links, but I found that's pretty effective to at least know what it is we have and kind of keeps a catalog there, better than searching through someone's SharePoint later.
Yep.
Anything else?
Yeah, any other questions rolling in for Heidi? We've got a few more minutes if we need it.
I will comment on one more thing that wasn't my presentation, but one thing I've been doing recently that we saw, I think it was our like chief marketing officer do recently. When you start a presentation, it doesn't matter what group you're presenting to, but it's super helpful to put one slide with key takeaways. Like, here is where I'm taking you, and here's what I want you to walk away with. And it was hard for me to do that because I like to let the story unfold and keep my, my insights or what I really learned for the end. But I found it's much more effective to kind of give a roadmap in the beginning, and you feel like you're kind of dumbing it down because you're showing where I'm going from the beginning. But I think it's really helpful to at least keep people on track and keep people's attention because they know where we're going, or not just meandering too much. So I think a key takeaway slide at the beginning, which is like 3 bullet points, has been super helpful.
Well, and especially when presenting to executives, you never know where these conversations might go. So if you don't hit the high points early, you're in danger of spending half an hour on the methodology slide and never getting to the actual meat of the presentation.
Yes, I feel like we've all been there. Yes.
Not that I speak from experience.
All right.
Just the last check to see if any other questions have come in. I believe, Heidi, that is it.
Okay, well, thank you. And if anybody has further questions, feel free to link with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue the conversation. So thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing it. This was great. Everybody, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Feel free to grab a cup of coffee, check up on your email, and we will be back at the top of the hour. Thanks, Heidi.
All right, thank you.